only work the posted hours posted by the laser guru. Many years ago, I worked at a place with lots of arcade games and pizza, similar to Chuck E. Cheese. I was hired to do maintenance, repair, and setup of those arcade machines. There was already someone there doing this, but they were never allowed to work more than 40 hours a week, and the place was open 7 days a week, 9 hours a day, so that's 63 hours a week, not including prep for opening and cleanup after closing. At the end of my first shift, I was told that I also was expected to help with cleanup, since everyone that worked close had to help with cleanup. All my shifts were close shifts. This meant that I had less time before my morning classes than I expected when taking the job, but a few extra bucks was valuable to a starving college student. Fast forward about 2 months. New manager, fresh out of high school, gets his big boy boots on and starts making rules. First rule: a schedule with everyone's hours for the next week would be posted by Friday morning. Second rule: you must clock in before your posted shift start time, but not more than 5 minutes before your shift. Third rule: you must clock out at the end of your posted shift end time, no more than 5 minutes after. At the end of my first shift, after these rules were created, I clocked out and left everyone else to do the cleanup. To be clear, it's not like I was getting time and a half overtime or anything. All I expected was to be paid my normal rate, and they didn't even want to pay even that, so I clocked out and left. At the beginning of my next shift, they were angry. They expected me to clock out and then work over an hour for free, every single shift. Now, these were only 5-hour shifts too. I refused. The next week, they posted a new schedule with my shift ending an hour later. Since everyone saw the list, they all got mad. I guess they were all just fine with wage theft until one person refused. The next week, everyone had an extra hour on their shifts, and at this point, his wage theft scheme had failed. Fast forward a couple weeks, and this new manager doesn't come in on Thursday. He doesn't come in until Monday. No schedule is posted. Monday afternoon, I go in to get my check, and I say, "See you next week." I'm told my shift started half an hour ago. I say that I made plans since I wasn't on the schedule. Well, no schedule means that I couldn't be on it. The manager points to a schedule posted on the wall, printed just hours before, after some of the shifts on it had already started. I thanked him for posting next week's schedule early and started to leave. Then I was threatened with termination, but I kept walking. I came back a week later and talked with the daytime guy doing the same job. He said it was a bad week. Many machines were down, and he was walking around with like $100 in tokens because he was spending much of his time giving refunds, to the point that he didn't have enough uninterrupted time to make any repairs. He was also keeping a roll of masking tape with him to tape over the coin slots as the machines failed. This meant a lot more use on the remaining machines, which started to show it quickly. I go to clock in and was told that I had been fired. I smiled and walked out. I spoke with the daytime guy a while later. Apparently, they never filled my position. People working with mechanical and electrical knowledge willing to work minimum wage are rare. Instead, he was getting 14 hours a week in time and a half overtime, with a base pay almost twice what I was getting. This extra expense came out of the department budget, which also paid for replacement parts. Even before this, it was never enough to buy parts. This from the department budget thing was from the same manager. He didn't want normal payroll to go up. For a while, basically everyone was carrying around $20 in tokens to give refunds, but all the comps were unacceptable to the manager, so now only the sales desk could issue refunds, which meant that ordering pizza took forever, and many people just left angry rather than waiting for a refund. Most machines had tape over the token slots. This backup at the sales desk didn't last long, as few people were coming and no one was booking parties anymore. Other than staff, it was basically empty. It didn't even smell like pizza anymore. With no customers, the daytime guy finally had time to make repairs, but didn't have the parts to do most repairs. As far as I know, that manager stayed there until the place went under about 8 months after I was fired for not working a shift that his own rules said that I couldn't work. There was a previous manager that wasn't great, but wasn't trying to wage theft or any of that mess. Generally, things worked out pretty smoothly under her, and there was a long waiting list for booking parties. She was let go as soon as this guy graduated. I don't know why, but I assume nepotism. I could be wrong about that. Maybe she was doing something that got her fired, but if that was the case, then there were at least 10 people that were more qualified for the job. I never met the owner or even knew his or her name. Now, it was entirely possible to clock in or out more than 5 minutes outside of your scheduled shift, you just wouldn't be paid for that time. Everyone that stayed late clocked out late, and I'm pretty sure none of them got paid for that extra time. I know I clocked out late a few times and I didn't get paid for the extra time. I worked the closing shift on Sunday before the Monday that I walked out, and the previous week's schedule was still posted at that time, and I had not been scheduled to work on Monday or Tuesday of that week. I even asked the woman running the show that night about the new schedule, and she didn't know, but assumed that we were just following the previous schedule. No one called me after the new schedule was posted. I was in the middle of a school-related project and only stopped by to get my check, deposit it, and get back to the project. If he hadn't tried to force me to work that day, I probably would have worked the schedule from the previous week, but him being a bully made me follow his rules to the letter. Now, even if I was in the wrong to take the week off, he should have been painfully aware what happened when I was gone for a whole week. Firing me when I was about to start working on cleaning up the mess that he started was next level incompetence. The daytime guy, he was no moron, but he also didn't really understand a lot of the machines. When I started, I'd been repairing electronics as a part-time job and hobby for years, and finding and replacing a single bad part on a $500 plus arcade board was usually pretty easy for me. Sometimes the repairs looked insane because I had to work with what I could find at Radio Shack, but they worked. The daytime guy was great with mechanical stuff, but when I started, the soldering iron was in a dust-covered box because he'd basically never touched it. He didn't even have the correct type of solder. He had stuff meant for plumbing repairs. When I left, cheap board-level repairs turned into expensive board replacements that there was no budget for. Before I got there, this wasn't a big issue because previous management always allocated extra money rather than having a machine just remain dead. New manager did not do this. Not sure why, but if I had to guess, it's because he didn't want to explain why these expensive board replacements stopped and started again perfectly in line with my time there. Someone else was obviously watching the books, or else he wouldn't have played games with how to pay a daytime guy all that overtime. This is malicious incompetent compliance because holy cow, they're wanting to save money so bad, they're forcing these people to work this minimum wage when they are deserving of more due to their abilities and their trade and all of that, and then just tries to cut corners, save money, ends up costing a lot more, messing the whole place out of getting workers. People aren't buying the pizza at the pizza place. People aren't playing the games at the game pizza place. It's all falling apart just to this one stupid decision. OP just stood his ground, said, hey, I'm not putting up with this crap. Thank you for just doing me right, sarcastically, and then boom, the whole place falls apart, gets fired, and it just blows up into smithereens. OP stood your ground, malicious compliantly. Way to go. Yet another new manager facing the consequences of their actions story, posted by Absurd and Nihilistic. I'll keep the details as vague as possible because I'm still with this organization. I work for a government department. We have offices and locations all over the state. I'm based out of a city that's about a 2-and-a-bit-hour train ride to our head office. At the time, I was working in a team that had members working remotely all across the state, looking after policy, process, and quality assurance. Our old manager had gone and gotten himself promoted for being genuinely brilliant at his role. So our new manager, Steve, was hired in from the glorious world of banking, and he was here to whip us lazy public servants into shape. A few days after he began his role, he called us all to a teleconference to inform us that he wanted all of us to be at the head office 8 a.m. tomorrow morning for an all-day in-person team meeting. He wanted to see us in meet space to size us up, understanding what we were doing, and see where we weren't keeping up with the private sector. As I mentioned, due to the nature of the work we were doing, we were all across the state. So, in person, whole team meetings were rare, and if they occurred at all, they were booked weeks in advance. We were all adept at video conferencing long before COVID. Some of us tried to tell our new high-flyer manager that almost none of us were in the same city as him, and to be there on such short notice would mean travel expenses, meal allowances, overtime, and blah blah. He didn't seem to care, and told us in no uncertain terms to just be at the head office tomorrow at 8 a.m. before abruptly hanging up. Now, I should explain something. I'm one of a handful of union delegates in our department. I know our award back to front, specifically the sections dealing with travel, allowances, and overtime. So I engaged in malicious compliance mode. If Steve wanted us there, fine, but it'll cost him. So I quickly went about emailing my team what Steve had done by requiring us to be in the head office at 8 a.m. and what to do. Because we'd have to travel outside our normal work hours, our workday clock started ticking the moment we left our homes and only stopped once we got home. Some of our team traveled overnight. They were entitled to overtime to travel, a dinner allowance, and accommodation for the night, and the same returning. As someone traveling in the morning before 7 a.m., I was entitled to a breakfast allowance, lunch allowance, and if I got home after 9 p.m., a dinner allowance also. So I left my house at 5 a.m. to catch the only train that would get me there in time. The train was running slightly behind, but I made it in time. So my first 3 hours of my workday down, and I'd done no work. After a brief period of us introducing ourselves to Steve, he proceeded to spend the next 4 hours telling us about all of the things he did at the bank, how he made so much money for them, where they'd sent him as a holiday bonus, how we're all stuck in the past in the public service. The work he'd seen wasn't up to private sector standards and blah 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 blah. He had all the cocksureness of a finance bro who had always failed upwards because others had picked up his slack. By 3 p.m., my entire team were into overtime pay territory, and Steve was just warming up with his non-charm offensive. Another 3 hours goes by with Steve verbally patting himself on the back, deeply in love hearing his own voice, but all I hear is cha-ching, cha-ching. Steve decided that 5 p.m. was a good time to finish up. He stopped mid-sentence, looked at his watch, and unceremoniously said, "That's all for today, go home now," and walked out. After I and a few others gave a few awkward shrugs to each other, we all packed up and started to make our separate ways home after doing no work all day. I, myself, got to the train station pretty quickly, and I saw a train was leaving soon that would get me home around 8 p.m. Or I could catch the all stations train and get home closer to 9:30 p.m. You know what? No matter how fast I could run, I just couldn't catch that earlier train. Darn, I just have to catch that all stations train and be on the clock for another hour and a half, plus have my dinner paid for. Such rotten luck. I submitted my claims the next day, 4.5 hours at double rate, my train tickets, my taxi fares to and from the train station, my breakfast, lunch, and dinner allowances. For me alone, it was close to a $500 expense claim. The rest of my team followed suit and ensured they claimed everything too. Steve tried to fight us on approval for the claims, but quickly learned that, unlike in the world of banking, most public servants are union, and we'd raise living heck if he denied our award guaranteed allowances. His all-day Steve Fest symposium blew a good $6,000 hole in his budget. Needless to say, while Steve was our manager, he never required us to attend an in-person meeting again. Video conferencing was just fine. He only lasted 6 months before leaving for new opportunities. He just went back to his old job at the bank. Guess he was the one who couldn't keep up. You gotta love it here. New guy comes in managing, it's like, "I'm better than you, look at all the cool things I did, you all suck, you need to keep up with my pace." He doesn't listen to the rules, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and the workers do, especially OP, who knows all of the award stuff like the back of his hand. They coming in like, "Oh, alright, you wanna do this? It's gonna be on your bill, man." And then boom, $6,000 of a budget later, crashed out, just $500 for OP alone. Incredible malicious compliance, sticking to the rules, but just twisting them up just a little bit to make it awesomely fun. Killer MC story. Way to go, OP. Your toddler's tantrum bites me. Okay. Click the video on your screen for this crazy story, and I'll see you there.